The problem with the media, they are obliged to present the news. And so the news is isolated from the rest. The first flaw of their vision is the fact that they are focused on the present, which is normal because they are working on the present. But the present is just now, and tomorrow is different.
If I understand correctly, you say that there's a lot of uncertainty in general in the world, in international relations between countries and blocs. And do you see where it's all heading? Do you see a trend or trends?
Since we were talking about scenarios, in a way, this global disorder is a kind of an antidote to the global war.
Hello and welcome, and great to have you, Professor Manlio Graziano, this morning. This is morning in Paris. We are recording this on the 28th of January 2025, a bit more than 1 week after the inauguration of Donald Trump. And we're here to talk about the state of the world. I personally had a chance to have Professor Graziano is one of my teachers in Sorbonne, teacher of geopolitics. He's definitely one of the most brilliant geopolitical analysts on the continent. Also, we cooperate in a lot of work in educating people on geopolitics and trying to make more sense about what's going on in the world. And obviously, above anything else, Professor Graziano is the founder and the director of Spykman Center, which is quite a unique form of think tank with a focus on students. Thank you very much for coming today. How about you explain, first of all, what Spykman Center is and why it is so important, why is it different from other research organizations in geopolitics?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for organizing this meeting. And I saw that you set immediately the bar very, very high. So I have to be at the level of expectations you created with your presentation. But still, I tried to do my best. So Spykman Center was created 4 years ago. And actually, the beginning of the idea was from my students from Sciences Po, because I have a class with them, a course with them, which is about the methodology of geopolitical analysis, so something very specific, how to make a geopolitical analysis. But the course is a good course. I like it very much. I like the level of the students. But the problem is that it's pretty short. It's a full semester course, and it lasts all in all 24 hours. Of course, they have to work a lot, even at home. I have to work at home a lot because I want to follow them step by step. But and I see that many of them become very interested and sometimes even enthusiastic about geopolitics and geopolitical analysis, and they want to keep going with it. And the problem is that the course is finished. So we needed to, sometimes I had students came to see me and ask me what I do next. And I was always embarrassed because I didn't know because I have master courses. So it's very limited, the choice after the master. They usually have an internship, they go to work. So they lost touch with geopolitical analysis. So the idea came from that, and I said maybe we can do something, create a forum in which we can go on with the teaching and the learning of geopolitical analysis. And that's it. It has been going for 4 years, and I have students who come, go, of course, because they have different, especially my students are from all around the world, so they go back home, and even if the majority of our meetings are online, of course, but still it's not easy to keep all the content. But a small group remained, and this small group is composed by very motivated and talented people, former students. Some of them are still students. At the end, they prepared PhD, something like that. Others are already in working, and and with them we guarantee the continuity of this.
So you mentioned the methodology of geopolitical analysis is the core of your work. So maybe before we delve into the actual details of what you think about the state of the world today, can you maybe give us a couple of sentences about the essence of your methodology? How do you approach geopolitics, and how do you think people should approach it? Because, you know, the word is so popular, like everybody, every journalist in the world, I think literally 100% of the world's population, at least once in their lifetime, use the word geopolitics without probably knowing what it is. What's your definition? What's your methodology? And I think this is important so we can understand what follows, which is the actual discussion on the state of the world.
Yeah, first of all, again, I don't want to have, and I don't think I have, the copyright of the word, because you're right, this word today covers a lot of meanings, different meanings. Usually, geopolitics for media operators and for people, because people listen to the media, so they absorb this idea that geopolitics is a synonym of international relations or international politics, which is okay. I don't have anything against it. As I said, I don't have the copyright, but for me it's something different. It's essentially a tool for analysis, and this is why I teach geopolitical analysis and methodology of geopolitical analysis, because we need to have the tools to analyze international politics. So there are two differences. I mean, it's the difference between mathematics and engineering. One is the tool for the other. And more or less, I intend geopolitics in this way. And what I mean, I have different focuses, of course, about what is important to understand if you wanted to make a correct geopolitical analysis. But essentially, if I had to isolate just one point, and this point is that everything that happens today has a context. The problem with the media, I mean, they do their job, and I have nothing against their job, and they do very often very good job. But they are obliged to present the news. And so the news is isolated from the rest. Even when you follow the news on internet or television, whatever, you have different news, and all of them are separated. Now we move from the Middle East to Goma, to Democratic Republic of Congo, as they were not linked. So probably the most important thing is precisely to identify these links. And these links, it's much easier to identify them if we dig in the history. So the two main elements we have to keep into consideration is history and geography. So how physically the region we are talking about presents itself, and what are the historical links that the region has with the entire rest of the world. And the entire rest of the world is not, and the second step, I would say, is not equal, in the sense that if you go to the General Assembly of the United Nations, you see all the benches with the name of the countries, and the delusion behind it is the fact that all the countries are equal, which is not true, of course. There are some countries that have much more power than other countries. We see now today, if we just wanted to move a little bit to the current affairs, everybody is looking at the United States, because the entire world politics depends on what is decided in Washington, D.C. So it's clear not everybody looks toward Malta or San Marino, but Malta and San Marino has the same right formally as the United States at the United Nations. So we have to consider the different weights of the different actors. So when I wanted to present international relations under a geopolitical eye, I present it as a huge chessboard in which you have many players that have different pieces. Not everybody has the same pieces, and all of them move the pieces when they want without following rules. And if you know, and if our listeners know the game of chess, they know that every time there is one move on the chessboard, everything changes. And this is the reality of international relations.
So what are the moves that have been done recently? I think you mentioned Congo. I think obviously this is a sort of temporal focus since a couple of days, since yesterday basically. I remind everybody that we are 28th of January 2025, but the main event, as you rightfully said, happened in Washington, D.C. So a bit more than a week ago, Donald Trump became once again President of the United States. And it feels like what at least the medias and the general discourse consider as the world's most important and most pressing issues, like conflict in Ukraine, like war in the Middle East, are definitely all going to be impacted. And we also see that in fields of technology, fields of global economy. Already there are reactions and anticipations for big change. And Donald Trump has also, in a sense, demonstrated the vector, at least signaled something about the vector of his policies in different domains. If we try to put this in this historical and geographical context that you mentioned, if we try to contextualize this, what can you make out of it? If we go further and deeper than just this half panicking, half maybe exalted, almost messianic, greeting of Trump as the savior of one part of political spectrum, and almost demoniac world, the destroyer of worlds sort of image he got in a different part. What can we, if we really go into the essence of what he's bringing to the world, what can we make out of it?
Yeah, I'd say that panicking is allowed and justified at the time being now. But if we wanted to understand what is going on, we need to apply what I mentioned before, because if you just take the fact Donald Trump was elected, the 77 million Americans voted for him, and they knew perfectly who this guy is.
Or did they?
Oh, they did. They did. I mean, it's nothing secret.
Yeah.
They tried to stop the electoral process. He was condemned. He is a serial liar. So they couldn't ignore that, and they voted for him as well. So it means that something happened. Donald Trump is the symptom of the American crisis. It's not the producer. Of course, he can worsen the American crisis, and I think he will. But he is the product of it, essentially.
When you're talking about American crisis, what exactly do you mean?
American crisis, I'm going to explain that, because we are precisely in this context. The context is the American crisis. Or I'd say precisely after November the 5th, is American desperation, not just crisis. American people desperation, because if they go so far as voting for this guy, it means that they are desperate. And the American crisis, the fact, if we want to summarize it very rapidly, is the fact that America is not as strong as it was 10, 20, 50 years ago. And this is not just something that American people can read on the papers or on even in the history books, but they feel it, they notice it in their daily life. They cannot. We are talking about Americans, but the same thing is even worse. Maybe is happening here in Europe or in Japan as well. So it's not but we're talking about the United States. And the United States, in this context, has much more to lose than Europe, because, of course, the United States was the hegemonic power, has been the hegemonic power for 70 years. So they have more to lose. And they feel that they are losing. I'd say that the moment when it became evident to everybody was the crisis in 2008, especially in the United States. This crisis hit very hardly, and so people understood that things were changing, and so the political repercussions of this crisis, we saw them in 2016, because not everything happens immediately. I mean, we remember that. The economic crisis in 1929 had the first political repercussions 2-3 years later in the United States, in Germany, and somewhere else. So now we are living the outcomes, the effect of this crisis. So the crisis is essentially the fact that the United States is no longer able to dominate the world as it was before. Not because they are weaker, but because they have much more competitors in this world. And what it was taken for granted before is no longer granted, because now China is occupying a huge room on international politics and economics. Let's take just this example. At the beginning of this century, 25 years ago, in the Fortune 500 ranking of the 500 most important companies in the world, the United States was overwhelming, superior to all other countries. And China had just, if I remember well, 5 companies. Today is China forward in this list. And we are talking always of 500. So it means that, relatively speaking, China took a lot of room that was occupied by, of course, France, United Kingdom, and Japan. Japan especially lost a lot of positions, but also the United States. So it means that this is just a small example, but it's an example of what is going on in the world, and why the margin of maneuvers of the United States and, of course, as I said, Europe, Japan, and so on, are reduced. And so this idea that we needed to find a responsible for that, we needed to go back to the past, we needed to make America great again, because we are losing our power. So this is an international phenomenon, and we see it in Europe as well.
Sorry, I just don't want to interrupt, but it's very interesting what you're saying, because if you speak to a lot of Americans in America, and especially I would say in California, for example, or in Texas, where a lot of tech companies are moving from California, they are incredibly enthusiastic, because their maybe subjective feeling is that the American tech companies and American capital is basically controlling the world's technological output, which in a sense is one of the biggest vectors of power. And they have a lot of enthusiasm regarding that. Does it mean that they are not seeing the entire context that you mentioned, that they are only seeing one part of it? Or maybe indeed the tech can be the leverage to secure the American dominant position in the world right now?
The first flaw of their vision is the fact that they are focused on the present, which is normal because they are working on the present.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But the present is just now, and tomorrow is different. If 1 week ago, nobody was talking about DeepSeek.
Mm-hmm. True.
And all of a sudden, it appeared. And you saw the NASDAQ fell miserably a couple of days ago. and that created a situation of panic. Because, of course, if you are a politician, if you are a business people, you need to focus on the present, but also forecast what is likely to happen and take into account all the scenarios, all the possibilities. And they don't do it. So this is why they are enthusiastic, and they are panicked immediately after, because the more you are enthusiastic and the more you panic when your enthusiasm is hit by the reality. And this happens in the business, and it happens in politics and everywhere. So, but one thing I would like to underline, because sometimes when I talk about the American decline and relative decline, because American is not a decline, it's a relative decline. It's relative to the rise of other competitors, especially from Asia. It looks like I'm signing the certificate of death of America. It's not the case. America is still, the United States is still the most important country in the world. And as I said before, the proof is the fact that everybody, before saying anything everywhere, they watch what is going on in Washington, D.C. And this is the proof that they are still the dominant power. But it's a dominant power in relative decline. So it's losing pieces in this decline. And they have some strong element of power still, like the technology one, military ones as well. The power of the money, of the dollar. We see that Donald Trump is using the threat of a tariff everywhere, and because they can do it, they can do the threat. They are using the threat and not just the threat of sanctions everywhere against everybody. But again, this is the mistake of those. I can understand Trump doesn't see the day after, so it doesn't have any idea of the future, or even the hour after. But you have a leading class, a ruling class. They should be much more careful to what can happen in the future and take into account what. And if you shoot sanctions against everybody, or use the tariff as a threat or an actual fact. If you threaten Denmark, Panama, and Canada, you are pushing yourself in a corner, because the other one wants to find an alternative. At least they want not necessarily to abandon the United States to move in the arm of China. We should talk about China as well. But at least send a signal that they are no longer ready to be bullied by the United States. And this is for example, the success of the BRICS, recent success of the BRICS. You know, the BRICS were founded in the 2010s. And after the outcome of the crisis, 2008, it almost disappeared. Nobody talked about the BRICS anymore. They became, again, very popular after the invasion of Ukraine by Russians. Why? But simply because this invasion of Ukraine was answered with a series of very huge and heavy sanctions. So a lot of countries started thinking, we are in the line of fire. If we do something that the United States doesn't approve, we risk to have sanctions. And so they tried to find a way to organize themselves, not because they have the same goals. I mean, they have the same goals to defend themselves from these risks. And this is for
a risk hedging exercise, basically.
Exactly. So they are trying to find different options, not different shores. but different options. Okay, we have a good relation with China, for example, or with India, with Australia, with Japan. I don't know, someone else, not only the United States, because we need to counterbalance your way of making policy. Because if you act as an imperial power when you are no longer an imperial power, it plays against yourself.
But isn't it what Russia exactly did by invading Ukraine, like playing against the rules and playing outside of the bracket of, let's say, the resources and the logic that it should be in, given its position and relative power, and yet they failed to basically to contain themselves, or the other more important powers failed to contain Russia. So if we say, well, the United States, for example, would use sanctions in a sense against their own rules of the World Trade Organization, right? Because it goes at least against the spirit of WTO, maybe not against the
even
word
against the letter.
But yes, but it goes against the spirit. But isn't it what Russia made? So wouldn't BRICS be in a sense running from one potential bully to a bully that already proven that he is extremely aggressive? Like, what's your take on that?
The take is simply that Russia is not the United States. I am sure that all the other members of the BRICS, even the new members, know perfectly that they are not threatened by Russia. I mean, Ukraine can be threatened by Russia, Georgia, Moldova, they can be threatened by Russia, but nobody else. And even, I don't think even Georgia and Moldova, they can stay much more secure because Russia proved that it's not able to conquer Ukraine. So I don't think that they will try to do. They are not able to keep their allies, even they abandon Assad in a miserable way. They abandoned Armenia in a miserable way. So Russia is really in the dire straits today. This is why I always contest what people say, oh, Russia will win the war. Russia lost the war on February 24, 2022, because Russia acted below its capabilities. So
even above its capacity.
Above, yeah. So it's not the same thing. I mean, Russia offered this. Russia didn't offer actually because BRICS were there and they already existed. So the example of what happened to Russia pushed the other countries to go and join also the BRICS, because they wanted to have this alternative. And the more the United States pushes against even its allies, the more these allies are tempted to go see somewhere else. And of course, this is a big success for France, because France have been trying to do that for 70 years. So the more the United States is arrogant, the more France is successful in its idea of trying to find something else.
Yeah, or creating an alternative geopolitical sort of
exactly
center.
Even though today France is not able to do it, because France is in a dire strait, politically and economically, and Europe itself.
Yeah, well, self-organized also, like that didn't come from an external attack.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that being said, so what would be your general take, like, on the state of the world today? So America is in crisis, even if they are trying to project that it's the opposite. They are, if I understand correctly, you say that there's a lot of uncertainty in general in the world, in international relations between countries and blocs, and do you see a vector in all this? Do you see where it's all heading? Do you see a trend, or trends in what's going on? Like, what should we know, and about the state of the world today, and what should we expect from it for the next years?
Of course, it's impossible to predict what is going to happen. But as I said before, when you study geopolitics, you need to identify the trends, the major trends. And here we are in a major trend that started in 1950s. And this major trend is the relative decline of the United States. It started at that time. Then, of course, it's not because the relative weight of American GDP is growing slower than the world GDP that things changed immediately. It took time to notice that the United States were losing ground. Was the war in Vietnam was the first clear signal, but not just because the war in Vietnam brought with it the end of one of the pillars of Bretton Woods. So the convertibility of gold and dollar. So it was the beginning. The 70s was the clear decade in which it was clear that the United States was beginning to lose ground in international politics. But coming to now, many things happened since then. 50 years went away, and now the situation is a situation in which we have a declining power, the United States, and rising power, China, which is also on the verge of a crisis. So China is not very well in a good shape, I would say. They have a lot of problems, but still they are occupying some economic room in the world that was previously occupied by Europeans and Americans and Japanese. So we have this trend, and this trend is a path to collision. If you remember, when an occasion of his 100th birthday, Henry Kissinger released an interview to The Economist in which he said, we are on the path of collision, of the great power collisions. And everything is built to go toward this direction, but it's not necessarily going this way. Because another task of geopolitics is to imagine different scenarios, not just one. This is the most likely, especially if the situation goes out of control, because there are some...
Well, I remember reading, and we're talking about, I think it's from a book from something like 2014, John Mearsheimer, like one of the most prominent American, what they call realists in international relations, influential advisor. He tried to almost mathematically prove, and we're like more than 10 years ago, that a kinetic war between the United States and China was literally inevitable through the logic of theory of realism. So you think it's not inevitable? You think there are options? Or?
First of all, I doubt very much on
or the collision doesn't necessarily mean kinetic warfare for you.
No, it means that, but I don't think that it's possible to forecast and predict what is going on by mathematical calculations. I remember, I'm coming from Italy, I remember that there was one of the founders of the Communist Party in Italy, who was put aside when Stalinism took control of the party, Amedeo Bordiga. Amedeo Bordiga was a Marxist who wanted to apply in mathematical terms the Marxist theory. And he predicted the revolution in 1975. It was precise, more or less like the Jehovah's Witnesses predicted the end of the world. And his mathematical calculations were partly correct, because in 1974 there was a huge crisis. And for him, the idea was, from this crisis we go to the revolution, but it didn't work. Because reality is much more complex. It's not something that you can calculate it by just aligning numbers and make operations.
No, when I said mathematical, he didn't really try. Mearsheimer didn't try to prove it mathematically with the formulas, but he was advancing arguments from.
Yeah, but that's the same.
His understanding of the theory, yes, but in the end,
it's the same because there are different. For example, we are on the path of collision. By the way, Henry Kissinger himself said it's not necessarily happening. But in the United States, there is a school, by the way, led by a former collaborator of Henry Kissinger, Fred Bergsten, who have been thinking for ages, since the 80s, of this idea of the G2. And for him, at that time in the 80s, G2 was between the United States and Japan, and then it was United States and European Union, then it was the United States and China. Then I said, oh, China has become a total. But now again, I say, oh, we can make a G2 with Europe to contain China, but not to fight against China. So this idea of G2 is an idea that is still floating on American politics, on American thinkers, and fundamentally is if the United States find a way of cooperating with the other strongest power in the world, we organize the world as we want. So this idea is not so far away.
And yet Donald Trump decided to ignore European institutions and do exclusively bilateral talks.
Yeah, this is exactly. This is one of the trends in the sense that for many in the United States, Europe as a whole doesn't exist anymore. And so they say, okay, we need to find someone else to talk with. There is this idea that we can talk with Russia because we need to separate Russia from China, so we can use Russia against China. Maybe it's probably the most likely possibility, but let's not forget this idea of the G2, because there are also signals from Donald Trump to find a way to dialogue, to install this dialogue.
And also signals that he wants to take away Greenland from Denmark.
Yeah, no, of course, but
it's very chaotic signaling there.
If we focus on the current American administration, we can say one thing. It's current today. I don't know about tomorrow because there are so many different ideas and options within the administration that it's very unlikely that they can stay together. Marco Rubio is speaking every day because he has to moderate and explain what Donald Trump says without thinking. Yeah. So that's the one of the examples. Elon Musk has completely different ideas compared to the MAGA movement. So it doesn't last this way. But I'm not sure that they will find a common vision, an American vision of the future, because they still have so many options that I doubt that they will figure out what to do with the rest of the world, and what the rest of the world, of course, will do with the United States.
So coming back to my earlier question, so how can you summarize really the state of the affairs today, like the declining, but in a sense aggressive, let's call it enthusiastic America, non-existent or less existent Europe, China walking on thin ice, Russia losing the war that it's preparing to win ideologically, at least with the internal market. Like what's the state of the world today, according to you? Like in one, like what's the snapshot? What's the photo of the world today, or the world today?
It's what everybody can see every day. There is an increasing global disorder that is every day. There is another piece that adds to this disorder. In a way, since we were talking about scenarios, in a way this global disorder is kind of an antidote to the global war. In the sense that today we see in the Middle East, we see it in Ukraine. Nobody is able to win a war. The war in Ukraine is lost by Ukraine, of course, is lost by Russia. The war in Palestine is lost by Palestinians, and it's lost by Israel as well, because Israel is preparing the end of the very idea of a land where the Jews are safe with this war. And if you imagine today a war between the United States and China, nobody can win this war. So, and this is probably the most optimistic point of view. They are so weak and so in trouble that it's unimaginable that they can win a war against each other. So if there is some rational thinking remaining somewhere, you don't go to a war that you are not sure you win. Even Putin was sure to win the war in Ukraine. In 1 week we take Kiev and then we go and we do whatever we want. It didn't go this way. So if you are sure that you are losing the war, you don't go to war. That's the thing. But the tensions are still there. And it doesn't mean that the tensions go away. They're still there. So these tensions are exploding somewhere. And this is the reason why the disorder is increasing, because they are there.
And what do you think about the actors that are trying to play a role, not necessarily as mediators, but at least try to take advantage from this divisions? I'm thinking about countries like United Arab Emirates, for example, that are trying to be friends with everyone by trying to also build a successful sort of a paradise in a desert for residents of places like Dubai, or countries like India, who obviously have difficult relationship with China, but who are also not aligning themselves with, at least publicly, with any major actor. Like, what's the role? You were talking about BRICS, but also BRICS, at least from my standpoint, doesn't seem to be very much aligned internally on many things. Like, it doesn't seem like Brazil or China or India or Russia, like just these four countries are not really, their vectors of interest are completely different. So what is it a chance for smaller countries like the Emirates to become sort of new Switzerland and become a platform, or their own context and history would not allow them to play this bigger role? They have money, or Saudi, for example, or I don't know, Brazil. And it feels like President Lula is also trying to play to create some sort of geopolitical capital for his country. Like, what's in it for these smaller but audacious players?
Maybe some of them can create their own Switzerland for the people living there. I doubt, but still. But they cannot play an international role, because it's the reason why the multilateral institutions don't work, because simply these multilateral institutions are not created. I mean, ideally they are created because they will bring peace in the world, but it didn't work this way. Neither the League of Nations nor the United Nations accomplished their main mission, which was precisely to keep the peace in the world. It didn't work this way. And it didn't work this way because the countries that are part in these multilateral organizations are there to promote their interest. And so when there is a crisis, and they meet together because they wanted to resolve the crisis, actually what they want is how they can take advantage from the crisis. And all of them reasons this way. And it's just wishful thinking, the idea that they are there because they want the peace. They are trying to take advantage of that. And if peace it's an advantage for them. They look for peace, but not always. I mean, just in this case. So I really don't think that small countries or even big countries like India then has other problems, I'd say, but I don't think that they can play a decisive role. They can play a specific role in some specific issues. We saw Qatar, for example, in this truce. Let's see how long it lasts. In Palestine played a role. Turkey is playing a role in Syria. Again, we see how long it lasts, this role of Turkey. But it's in specific cases they can have a specific role, but it's very unlikely they can have a global strategy. Turkey, speaking of Turkey, and Turkey could have played a role in the crisis between Russia and Ukraine at the very beginning of the war. And of course, if that had resulted in a end of the war, Turkey would have been very much pushed in international
empowered. Yes,
yeah, of course. But it would have been this place. And again, Turkey is there because Turkey is very worried about the fate of the Black Sea. So Turkey is a part of this war, even though they play the honest mediator, but actually they are part of the war. So it's always very complicated.
Yeah, Turkey, by the way, seems to be one of these overstretching powers that seems to also to play above its rank in a sense.
Absolutely.
Because economically it's not a great power, but militarily they are still. I don't have the numbers, but I think it's still the second biggest army in NATO, like by number of personnel, and they obviously, we've seen their direct involvement or indirect direct involvement in the small war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Recently, Syria, as you say, they're playing a role in Ukraine. They played a big role in the beginning of the war with Bayraktar. You remember the Ukrainians even made a song because it was so important. Now they also Istanbul hosted the very strange talks. We'll probably learn about many years after. It was very, very weird sort of negotiation that we never.
I was talking about that.
Yeah, so that was a very, 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 very strange thing happened there. But it doesn't seem that it's sustainable for them to try to play on all these chessboards, unless, for example, Syria will become their territory and they can economically extract something from it to compensate. But once again, it's a bet, right? It's in a sense it's a bet. Erdogan is betting, but at least they seem to be more successful than. Well, cynically speaking, more successful in special military operations than Putin, because Syrian operation was very successful, and Putin is still struggling with enormous cost of lives and money and basically everything. All sorts of costs are imposed on Putin and on Ukrainians while the war continues. Do you think that the war in Ukraine will indeed end as Donald Trump promises in the next 3-6 months? Can it end? Can it really be terminated as a conflict, or it will just take new form? Like what? Because you were talking about Turkey, and it's interesting to see. So I think it's a good example of a country that's being, as you say, opportunistic and sees opportunities, and try to seize them. And actually, well, in this tactical situation, they succeeded in seizing most of their opportunities. Is Trump's arrival in the White House an opportunity for Putin as well? Is he poised, do you think, well to sort of get the best of his make the best out of his failed attempt to capture Ukraine? What's going to happen, you think, in that part of the world, and what does it mean for us? Doesn't it empower other countries, other nations in provoking conflicts? We also see Rwanda and Congo, basically the last 24 hours story, doesn't it mean that we might end temporarily, at least, the terrible war in Ukraine, and then we might see other conflicts going on because people sort of are disinhibited. They see, well, we can do conquest, like territorial conquest, and we're not really punished in the end. It's like goes unpunished. But
this is the trend. And it's so clearly the trend that even Donald Trump decided that the United States has to conquer territory. We'll see, because it looks very complicated. But this is the trend. About the war in Ukraine, it's clear that this war is going to end. The moment is, if not because of the exhaustion of Russians' capability to make this war, because for the last 2-3 years now, you had people who said, "Oh, the sanctions didn't function. Russian economy is very good," and so it cannot last, because the economy is good if you can sell what you produce, not just pay the producers, because this is the Soviet Union. If you don't sell what you produce, you impoverish yourself in the short term. So Russia cannot survive this war so longer. So I think they are desperately seeking for a way out. But for them, the first focus is not economy today, I think, for people who wanted to get out of this war, and I think Putin is thinking of that. The main problem is China, because for what I read something in international politics and history, and I was there when the Soviet Union existed. You were not there, but I was there. I remember everything. And I read that in 1972, the Soviet Union was afraid of China. In 1972, when the relationship of forces was completely in favor of the Soviet, and they were afraid of China. So they are always been afraid of China. By the way, Russia stole territories from China abundantly in the 19th century, and tried to do it again in the 20th century. So they and for them, the fact that today they are in this relationship with China with a disproportion of forces favorable to China is the biggest threat in absolute terms, and they want to find. Again, we were talking about the people who wanted to go distance themselves from the United States. They wanted to distance themselves from China. And they were ready to do whatever it's possible to do it without losing face. And so the only way out from this war is if the United States offers Russia the possibility of get out of this war, not losing face. And Putin and his clique they are organizing this way out, because in November there was a meeting of all the oblast and part of the 80-something part of the Federation of Russia, in which the governor were instructed to present as a victory whatever the solution of this war was. And this is the advantage that Putin has compared to Zelensky, because he didn't fix an objective. And so whatever can come out from that, he can say...
Well, he did, but the objective was fixed in terms that can be in, like...
But he can say as well,
boxes, basically,
I destroyed the Nazism in Ukraine. If there are elections in Ukraine and Zelensky is defeated, he can say, okay, that's because we were able to defeat him. So, and Zelensky was imprisoned himself with this stuff and say, no, we will win only if we recover the borders of 1991, which is impossible today, for sure. So there are many chances that this war will end, either for exhaustion or because the ruling class in Russia is able to take advantage of whatever offer they receive.
Yeah, it's in a sense, it's like a double trend. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go deep into that, but it's interesting because on the one hand, you say that the trend is that going towards a form of violence between nations, and on the other hand, we see that the war in the Middle East, at least temporarily, seem to have a form of it's at least frozen in a form, so there's no hot side to it, at least for now. The Ukrainian war is also probably, this conflict is going to at least cool down in a sense, but as you say, a lot of people feel that there is tension in the air, that something might happen somewhere else, and it's just everybody is very, very tense. And I think the fact that Donald Trump is almost threatening Canada with invasion, it's not helping at all. And so do you think, just to sort of wrap it up, do you think there are reasons still to be optimistic in this world, is for us Europeans, but also maybe for humanity as a whole?
For humanity, for sure, because the end of the world was set several times, not just from the Jehovah's Witnesses. But for the time being, I don't think that the situation in the world is leading to much optimism, because either there is a general conflict, which is, of course, something we cannot even think of it, or there is more disorder. So there are not many reasons to be very optimistic. And you were talking about the frozen wars in Middle East or somewhere else, but I doubt maybe when our public will watch this video, this war are started again. I don't know. Everything is possible today, and every day I wake up and the first thing I watch the news, because I'm expecting what's next.
That is true. I think that's a habit that we got since COVID, in a sense, like what's the world going to bring us now?
Exactly.
What's today? Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Professor. This was a great discussion, and I hope we can continue this in an unlikely case where there are optimistic news to talk about, and in a likely case where there are some realistic news that require analysis. Thank you very much. I also invite everybody, obviously, to go check the Spykman Center website. It's spykmancenter.org. And we're very, very happy to answer any comments or questions. And let's try to stay optimistic, at least on our small level. Let's try to do something good around us, because indeed the world is becoming quite seriously chaotic.
Seriously.
Thank you. Grazie mille.
Thank you very much for the...
Merci. Thank you.
Merci.